Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. We're going to discuss several edible and medicinal plants this time because I got some short entries. So let's jump in here. Let's just dive in. And we normally start with our edible plants of the week. And this one is really common, probably a little more common up north than it is in the south. Of course, living in the mountains of North Carolina, I get it a lot. It's called fireweed. Very pretty little wildflower, and grows generally, it's one of the first things to pop up after a wildfire in the woods. It needs sunlight, and the fire comes and just clears out an area of forest. Those seeds have been laying dormant there for who knows how long, and they just pop right up. So there are two plants that are called fireweed. We've already discussed one. This is the more common. If you look up fireweed, this is the one you're going to get. And it does have some medicinal uses, but mainly as an astringent. A tea made from this plant is actually very popular, but I like it as an edible. The shoots taste like asparagus, and I love asparagus and anything that tastes like asparagus. And the leaves are actually a pretty nice pot herb. So when you find this one in the woods, really no problem harvesting a goodly amount. I'm not going to say wipe it out. You want enough to bear seeds and leave it for the next forest fire. But this plant's going to grow there for maybe 3 years, 4. Things are going to start growing in, shading it out very quickly. So it's not like you have to worry too much about over-harvesting fireweed. That said, obviously always leave some plants for the next generation. But what I'm saying is you don't have to just take 10% here and there, because it literally just grows right after a forest fire. A nice spring plant. Also, in that same spot, right after a forest fire, look for morel mushrooms in the spring. And so I always think where I see fireweed, I go to look for morels. Where I see there's been a recent burn, I go to look for morels and fireweed. Love morels. Morels are a true gourmet mushroom, only, early spring, and most common where there's been a burn. So this is one of those that, keep in the back of your mind. Where you see a burn, you're going to go gather these two plants. More often than not, actually. So cook the shoots like asparagus and use the leaves as a pot herb. Older leaves can be dried to make a very nice tea. Like I said, it's astringent. It's long been used to combat diarrhea and even excessive menstrual bleeding. So it does have some good medicinal plants. Flower buds actually make a very nice cooked vegetable. Normally, when we're taking flower buds, we might as well be taking the whole plant, because that's what is going to bear the seed. With fireweed, you don't have to worry about that so much, because it's going to be not growing in that spot before long anyway. But just leave a few. Overall, the plant is not very bold in flavor. It's nutritious and really fairly common. And like I said, probably the best thing about fireweed is that it's nearly ubiquitous. It grows everywhere if no one pulls it up, and wherever there's been a burn. And sometimes it'll grow where there's not a burn. It just really needs that sunlight. There are a couple varieties. The most known among foragers, the one we're talking about specifically right now, is Chaminarian Augustifolium. That's the one that grows in the north. That's the one that grows in the mountains where I live. That's the one where like 90% of foraging books or foragers talk about fireweed. This is the one they're talking about. It's the one most often used for tea. It's pretty purple flowers. It's easy to identify. Now there is another plant called fireweed. It's totally different. It also grows where there's been burns. I see it a lot of times in the sandhills in North Carolina. It's Arechites hieracifolius, I believe is what's how you pronounce that. Often called white fireweed or burnweed. Much more common in sandy areas with acidic soils. It will also pop up after a burn because the burn makes the soil more acidic most often. White fireweed is much stronger in flavor. It's bitter and pungent. I would actually think of it more as a culinary herb, actually, than I would an edible plant. You're not going to want to eat a whole lot of this. You probably wouldn't want to eat it on its own at all. It's one you're going to need to get used to because you want to pick it very young before it flowers. So you need to have seen this one for a full generation, a full season, and then the next year harvest it. But it's really pretty good to add to other pot herbs or to a salad. One blogger, when I was doing some research, I thought, what way have I not tried this? I actually found a foraging blogger online. I wish I had written down the name. I'm sorry, especially the person, because it was a pretty brilliant idea. Google this and see what you can find. Arechites, that's Erchites, I believe. Also known as burnweed or fireweed, white fireweed. This person had a really good recipe for just a little bit of the leaves and a fruit salad. And it's pretty good. It's something kind of like mint, sort of a bitter mint. But it's a strong flavor. You just don't want to use a whole lot of it. Like I said, I consider it more of a culinary herb, a flavoring. Only in an emergency would I really try to eat a bowl of Arechites cooked, like a pot herb. That would be like in a starvation situation or something. But the other fireweed, the more common Chamaenerion, Chaminarion, I guess, Augustifolium, which just means it has nice big leaves. That's much more common, and like I said, it is really more like asparagus, very mild, and that's one you can really get to know. Easy to spot, those purple flowers at a burn site, and look for those morels, absolutely. I'm going to get one more, since that was a fairly short entry, and this is one super easy to identify. I think everybody knows what forsythia is. If you don't know it, you've certainly seen it, okay? Forsythia is a bush with bright yellow flowers. It's usually one of the first things flowering in the spring. It'll be blooming right beside the redbud trees. All grows all over the place. Works fine in cold climates to hot, dry climates. Some people consider it sort of a weedy bush. Others use it as landscaping. There are several improved varieties. I like it. I like forsythia. But what you may not know about forsythia is that the bright yellow flowers, which are absolutely abundant in early spring, they actually have medicinal value, but they're also a good wild edible. They are, however, sharply bitter if you leave the base of the flower on there. The yellow part of the flower, mildly bitter. You throw it in a salad. You'd have to eat a ton of them to make a meal. But the white part at the base of the flower is very bitter. So use your fingernail and just pluck that right off. That's where most of the bitter is. Now, if you were going to make a medicinal bitters with this plant, I would absolutely leave it on. And medicinal bitters, of course, are good for digestion and good for your liver, and can actually help with asthma and other inflammatory conditions. Basically, when you eat something and your body thinks it may be an invading organism. That it will set off sort of an allergic reaction that can cause asthma attacks. It's pretty common, actually. That's one of my one thing I learned to help combat my asthma is to take a bitters formula before I eat. It gets those digestive juices flowing, and your body doesn't react and start making you cough and be congested and such as that. But if you were going to eat a lot of forsythia, enough to make a meal, I would absolutely combine them with other edible flowers and mild greens. Like I said, the red bud is growing at exactly the same time, and red bud blossoms taste like sweet, fresh garden peas. So, really, in just about any residential neighborhood, or even out around the edge of the woods where you're liable to find forsythia or red bud that's kind of gotten out somebody's landscaping, you can gather a bowl full of red bud blossoms and a handful of forsythia blossoms and have a nice salad. I mean, that's going to be a really good salad. Some early spring greens. You could absolutely cook everything together for a pot herb, dressed with a little bit of vinegar and some salt and pepper, or just a nice salad with some spinach or something else that's mild, maybe some sorrel. A lot of different things would go really well in there. And to make these more nutritionally available, especially if I was using like dock or dandelion greens or something like that, I'm going to do a wilted salad, which means pour hot bacon drippings over it, crumble up some bacon on it, maybe some good feta cheese or blue cheese, and then, nice little vinaigrette, maybe even a little honey, just to bring out the floral characteristics of these early spring flowers. And that's fantastic. I would do probably about the same and serve it with fish, nice grilled or broiled trout or whatever you got. Fried would be just fine. Really good in an omelet too. For my taste, I'm going to say forsythia is just a little too bitter, actually a lot too bitter to eat on its own. Much like the fireweed, the white fireweed we just discussed, but wonderful to add to any dish where you could use a little bit of bittering. Or again, if you remove the white parts, you could, if you trim them, you can actually make a syrup out of them, just same as you would dandelion blossoms. We did a whole show on that. You can cook it down with sugar, and it's really nice. I mean, it's just like honey. That would be nice to use in your vinaigrette as well. But I would not pick a whole bowl full of forsythia flowers and try to eat them as a salad. Now, if I could combine them with red clover blossoms, I might go 2-to-1 red clover blossoms. That would be very nice. Violets. Violets are nice and sweet. But most people don't know they're edible. Medicinally, the fruit of the forsythia is strongly antiviral. So really good to grow. Whether for just, as an ornamental, that pop of color in the early spring is just so nice. You can use forsythia shoots. They come up really straight and they're very flexible. We've used those if you make baskets, they'll form nice ribs for the baskets. It's a very traditional use for forsythia. It's really best to harvest them and dry them and then split them. Just right down the middle, so you made 2 pieces out of one, obviously. And best to harvest those in the fall. In the spring, they tend to be brittle. You'll harvest them in the fall, let them grow one season, and then cut. When you cut hedges, just take those and dry them. Split them with a knife. Just, cut them into 2 strips, essentially. And when you're ready to make your baskets, soak them in hot water until they get really flexible, and then you can pretty much bend them into any shape you like. You could probably make a whole basket out of forsythia, but it would be it's a little stiff for that. They make much better ribs. But for the medicinal use of the plant, very useful. I mean, worth growing just for that. But as a nice, like a garnish, essentially, a flavorful garnish, a bright, colorful, flavorful garnish. Really kind of hard to beat, actually. So now. I'm going to stop here on the edibles because actually next week we're going to get into garlic mustard, which is like one of my all-time favorites, so it's going to take a good bit longer. Garlic mustard is considered one of those awful invasive weeds, and I would literally gather it by the bushelful because I think it's just fantastic. And unfortunately, I've never gotten it growing in my garden. And I'm going to go ahead and put this out today, and I'll probably mention it again next week. Y'all, if you have or you know anybody who has garlic mustard growing on your property, if you could save me a seed or a plant that I can transplant, I would be so grateful. This is really one of my favorites, and the state of North Carolina has been trying to eradicate it. So where I might have once gone to pick garlic mustard, it has been doused in Roundup. So can't get it from where I usually got it from anymore, and never thought to grow it myself. I would really love to have some. But anyway, let's get on to the medicinal plants. And we're going to do just a couple of short ones, and then we'll get into one that's a little bit longer. The first is Roripa palustris. That is marsh yellow cress. Okay. Roripa is actually the species. It's known as yellow cress. There are 3 varieties, and palustris is Latin for marshy or swampy. So that's one that grows in damp soil. The other is Sylvestris and Therese, and that's one that actually grows in my area. It's known as southern yellow cress, and the French botanist André Michaud, who spent years like literally in my backyard. I have trails from my house that go up to Grandfather Mountain and the Parkway, and then you go another direction, you can start heading toward Mount Mitchell and Roan Mountain. André Michaud basically did a lot of his career just discovering the plants in my backyard. So I've probably got 30 or 40 plants growing in my backyard that end in Michaud or Michaud because he discovered them. Yellow cress is a wild edible. I don't think we discussed it yet in the foraging book. That's Spring Foraging Cookbook. And it's peppery. It's like watercress. As I've said many times, wild watercress is often contaminated in creeks that may have a cattle grazing upstream. You have to be a little careful with watercress. So I actually eat more yellow cress than I do watercress. It's peppery. It tastes like watercress. It's a touch more tough. So you want to harvest it in early spring. It contains a lot of vitamin C, and it's one of those plants our ancestors really used to prevent scurvy. It's somewhat like wild radish. We discussed wild radish last week. It's peppery, or was that week before last? I can't remember. It's got many helpful properties. The southern yellow cress was identified by André Michaud. It's great, and at least, you can pretty much use it interchangeably with mustards, and the vitamin C content of the plant is worth knowing medicinally. Supposed to be good for colds and fevers too. I just don't have a lot of documentation on it. The next I have in the book here, this is the weeds and grasses, medicinal weeds and grasses, is rumex, and that's the docks. And we discussed the docks under the sorrels because docks and sorrels are essentially interchangeable medicinally. Somewhat interchangeable edibly. Dock is a little tougher than sorrel and not as sour. The sorrels have more of the acidic properties to give it that lemony type flavor. But now the main medicinal, it's actually considered a weed, and I just can't understand how anybody consider any variety of salix as a weed. Your salixes are Willow and Osier. All salixes contain salicin, which is natural aspirin. Every single one of them is useful medicinally, as are poplar and a couple others. Several plants do contain salicin. Birch, poplar, the herb masterwort, which grows wild in my backyard. I probably need to pick some and show it to you at some point. That's a really easy one, but we all know the willows, okay? There are 62 varieties of salix that have been documented use in herbal medicine. I mean, this plant is so good, and one of them It is really unique. It's the red osier dogwood. If you know much about, Native American culture, most Native American tribes, especially the western tribes, and to some extent the northern, did not smoke straight tobacco. They would make a mix, and this mix would include the plant kinnikinnick or kinnikinnick, I've heard it pronounced both ways, which is red osier dogwood. Red osier dogwood is a very popular landscaping plant. It's absolutely beautiful. It's a small tree or a bush, and it has bright red stems. And I mean, in a winter landscape, you look at it just, white snow, and you see this like brilliantly red bush. That's your red osier dogwood. So it's very popular. The stems of that plant are actually mildly intoxicating. And some people say it clears the mind. People say it makes them a little high. It actually can help lower heart rate, lower respiration. It's good for pain. Some people say good for mental clarity. The salixes are a huge family of plants that grow all over the world, and every one of them has some kind of medicinal value. But they can actually vary quite a bit in their effect. Chief value of all, though, is salicin or salic acid. Willows and a few other plants do contain this, and they reduce pain and inflammation. They thin the blood and lower fevers. If you grew up watching television in the 80s and 90s, you probably remember Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman, and there was a whole episode about how she had discovered from the Indians, the Native Americans in her area, that willow bark could lower fevers and help with pain. That was a load of crap, okay? There's actually been documented use of salicin, of willow, in herbal medicine and masterwort and birch and all that, going back at least as far as ancient Greece. I think we could probably find it in just about every culture, from the Druids to the ancient Anglo-Saxons to, you name it. That was just, 90s politically correct PC myths. Dioscorides wrote of willow in De Materia Medica. I don't remember. Hippocrates never mentioned it, but I'm sure Galen and Pliny the Elder, just about every single one of the ancient herbalists wrote about this plant, and widely used, varieties of it widely used in ancient Chinese medicine and in India. Wherever it grows, and there is some variety of it that grows just about everywhere, people learned how to use it. So I'm not saying the Native Americans in the, Lakota Sioux she was near, I'm sure they used it. Sure they did. Maybe Sioux or Navajo, one of those. Absolutely they used it. But they didn't, she didn't, if she had been a trained doctor at the time, and you got to remember, you're talking 1890s, almost in all medicine, 95% at least was plant-based. They were using some heavy metals and various toxic substances as well, but nearly every single thing from the pharmacy was plant-based, and there's not a single doctor alive in the 1890s who would not have been fully aware of the uses of willow bark in America, in the American West, in Canada, in Mexico, in Europe, in Asia, in any single place where people practice medicine. So, load of crap. And anyway, let's get on to what Dioscorides, beautiful woman though, oh my gosh, Jane Seymour, whew. Wow. I think I probably watched that show as a kid for reasons other than early herbal medicine, you know what I mean? Dioscorides referred to willow tree as Itea. Interestingly, Itea was once a common name in the South. My grandmother had to hire some help, I guess after her second child, or third. She had a genetic kidney disorder and, high blood pressure during pregnancy, and then a hard recovery afterwards. And the lady she hired to help cook and clean was named Itea. And she fired Itea because Itea chewed tobacco and spat in the kitchen sink regularly. So got a nice little interesting family story to go along with that. But anyway, yeah, Itea used to be a common southern name. Like somebody might be named Rose or Hyacinth or, after Violet. It's sort of the English tradition of naming people after flowers and trees and plants. Fortunately, I was not named Arborvitae or something because, could have easily happened. Tree. Itea, according to Dioscorides, is a tree known to all, whose fruit, leaves, bark, and juice are astringent. The leaves pounded into small pieces and taken in a drink with a little pepper help those troubled with painful intestinal obstructions. The fruit taken as a drink is good for those who spit blood. The bark does the same. Burnt and steeped in vinegar, it takes away calluses and corns when rubbed on them. The juice of the leaves and bark, warmed with rosaceum or oil of rose, in a cup of pomegranate juice, and the pomegranate was very popular in ancient Rome and Greece, by the way, helps sores in the ears, and a decoction of them is an excellent warm pack for gout. It cleans away scurf or eczema. Still, salicin is much used for this purpose. If you look at most of your dandruff shampoos that you'll find in any drugstore or whatever, or psoriasis creams, you'll find they contain aspirin or salicylic acid. Been used for this purpose for eczema and psoriasis since ancient Greece, at least, right? A juice is taken from it at the time of its flowering, the bark being cut, for it is found coalesced within. It has the ability to clean away things that darken the pupils. So was actually used, I guess, as somewhat of an eye wash. Now, oddly enough, St. Hildegard von Bingen did not like willow. She did not approve of willow. She said the willow was cold and designates vices, since it seems to be beautiful. So because it was a cold, pretty plant, she thought it was bad for people. She says it is not useful for people except in external uses and not good for medicine. Its fruit and juice is bitter and not good for human use. If one wishes to eat it, it stirs up and augments melancholy in him, making him bitter inside and diminishes his health and happiness. I don't know why she didn't like it medicinally, but obviously I don't think it would make a very good food. So maybe that's where she's coming from. I don't know in any way. Certainly it is cooling in cases of fever, so you can kind of get that. As far as diminishing health and happiness or causing melancholy, that's a mystery to me. But as of 1500s England, Gerard wrote of 8 varieties of willow, listing their virtues as the leaves and bark of the withy, or willows, and they do, in Old English, they call them withes. Now, again, if you are a basket maker, and I do like to weave baskets from time to time, you'll probably be very, very familiar with willow, or withes in weaving baskets. That was the main material. Willow and rushes are what most baskets were made out of in Western Europe, and like fencing, wattle and woven fences and willow sculptures. I mean, willow is still much used in England for any kind of folk craft, and it would have been in the 1500s just as commonly used in Germany, France, you name it. And they, in Old English, called it withe or withy. And that's usually W-H-I, or it can just be W-I-T-H-Y, or W-H-I-T-H-E-S, I think is the old spelling. Wonderful plant to grow. My grandfather actually planted weeping willows around at either corner of the porches and at varying places in the yard, and then grew taller trees like oaks and magnolias and pear trees and various things. And he was a brilliant man. I've told you before how he could design. He had a mind for design, basically. And the way he did this, it formed natural air conditioning in the summer. Weeping willows pull water up from the ground and drip it out of their long fronds, right? So by using various heights of trees and sunny and shady spots, he could cause air movement through the willows, which would cool the back porch and make it like 10, 15 degrees cooler in the shade of the back porch than it would be out in the yard. I mean, camellias were part of that system, and a little fish pond he made. Just a very small concrete pond that he kept some goldfish in, and at one time an alligator. Brilliant, brilliant system. So that the backyard on a 110-degree day in the summertime in southeastern North Carolina, you'd go to the back porch and there'd be a little gentle, moist, cool breeze going through there, and it was actually pretty nice. And big farm and some farm hands and help in the yard. And in the evening, when the day's work was done, it was supper time. My grandmother would cook food for everybody, and all the farm hands and everybody would sit on the back porch in rocking chairs and come in and get their plate filled, and then come outside, and the family would either eat with them, or maybe the smaller kids would eat at the dining table. And just wonderful memories of evenings with that cool, gentle, moist breeze because of the willow trees, and the old men smoking their cigars and cigarettes and making jokes, and the dogs playing around. And that's the real South. What you may have learned on television about the South is so not what it's all about. People sitting on that porch, every race, black, white, Indian, Lumbee Indian, their wives and kids would come up and maybe bring a cake, or the kids would all be playing in the yard. And it wasn't a matter of any kind of racial division. It was just a matter of the Carrolls, prominent family, prominent since Charles Carroll was the richest man in America and the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence, were big landowners that employed most of the area. That's all there was to it. And nobody had any. I always say the only time we separated was on Sunday morning, when black folks went to the AME Zion Church, the Indian folks went to the. There were certain Baptist and Methodist churches that the Lumbee Indians were specifically, ministers in and ran. Raft Swamp Baptist Church was a big one around there, different ones. And then most of the white folks went to either the Baptist or Presbyterian church. My Catholic family had no church to go to because there was no Catholic. Well, it was illegal to be Catholic in North Carolina until the late 1800s, almost 1900. So eventually they started going to the local Baptist and Methodist churches. So that was the only time we were separate. We worked together, we played baseball together, we went to school together. Never went to each other's homes, ate at everybody's grandmother's table. And but the magic of that back porch, the way he set it up, and there were flowers. He'd plant climbing roses, and there'd be gardenias. Sweet-smelling flowers, and tobacco smoke, and a lot of laughter, and women all together gossiping, and the men telling jokes and picking on each other constantly. I think a lot of people don't understand that in the South. Well, I know this is true up north, especially among Italians, it seems to be. But in the South, if someone isn't giving you a hard time and picking on you, they don't respect you. If someone's not insulting you in a good-natured way, they don't, or playing a joke on you, you're not part of things. So, you get picked on constantly as a kid. And I don't know. It just, those are good memories. But anyway, let's get back to Willow. Okay, so he said that willows do stay the spitting of the blood and all other fluxes of blood whatsoever in man or woman, if the said leaves of bark be boiled in wine and drunk. The green boughs with the leaves may very well be brought into chambers and set about the beds of those that are sick with fever. They do mightily cool the heat of the air, which is a wonderful thing in refreshing sick patients. So even cut willow was thought to have this quality. and it transpires fluid. It's actually like a natural air conditioner. The bark hath like virtues. Dioscorides writeth about it being burnt to ashes and steeping in vinegar to take away corns and other risings of the feet and toes. Galen said that to slit the bark whilst it was flowering and gather a certain juice which they would use to take away things that hinder the sight. So again, used as somewhat of an eye wash. Culpeper, about 100 years later, said the moon owns it. Now, this is actually somewhat similar to what St. Hildegard was saying. When he said the moon owns it, he means it's cold. And maybe something in the energetics of the plant. Yeah, I can kind of see that. So anyway, he says both the leaves and bark and seed are used to staunch the bleeding of wounds at the nose of mouth, the spitting of blood and other fluxes of blood in man or woman, and to stay vomiting and provocation thereunto, if the decoction of them be drank in wine. It helps also to stay thin, hot, sharp salt distillations from the head upon the lungs, causing consumption. That's tuberculosis or bleeding of the lungs. The leaves bruised with some pepper and drank in wine help with the windy colic, gas essentially, and cramping. The leaves bruised and boiled in wine and drank stays the heat of lust in man or woman and quite extinguishes it. So again, it's that cold property. Interesting. If it be long used, the seed also is of the same effect. Water that is gathered from the willow when it flowers, the bark being split in a vessel to receive it, is very good for redness and dimness of sight or films that grow over the eyes. It stays the rheums that fall into them. That's basically, mucus from the eyes. It provokes urine being stopped if it be drunk. To clear the face and skin from spots and discolorings. Galen says the flowers have an admirable faculty in drying up the humors, being a medicine without any sharpness or corrosion. You may boil them in white wine and drink as much as you will, so you drink yourself not drunk. So don't drink so much you get drunk. Always good advice. The bark works the same effect if used in the same manner, and the tree hath always bark upon it, though not always in flower. Burnt ashes of the bark being mixed with vinegar takes away warts, corns, and superfluous flesh being applied to the place. The decoction of the leaves of the bark takes away scurf and dandruff. Again, it's like eczema and psoriasis. By washing the place of it. It is a fine, cool tree, the boughs of which are very convenient to be placed in the chamber of one sick of fever. And let's see, he goes on to talk about how it was useful for fevers, not as, I think this is a later entry, actually. Yeah, this would be, I think. Oh, this is from another herbal, Stone's herbal. It was being used along with cinchona or Peruvian bark quinine to help with fevers, but was not a cure for malaria. Miss Grieve wrote of black willow and white willow. She says of the black willow, which was the American willow, she said it was an aphrodisiac sedative, which is the exact opposite of what Culpeper had just said. I wonder if the white willow has more of the ability to quell the lust or whatever. I don't know. I don't think willow is any kind of aphrodisiac, but anything that has salicin would increase circulation. So we can see where they might be going with that. Anyway, black willow, an aphrodisiac, sedative, and tonic. The bark has been prescribed in gonorrhea and to relieve ovarian pain. A liquid extract is prepared and used in a mixture with other sedatives, largely used in the treatment of nocturnal emissions. The white willow, she says, tonic, antiperiodic, and astringent. So that does sound more like the Culpeper and Galen, Gerard has spoken about. It has been used in dyspepsia connected with debility of digestive organs, in convalescence from acute diseases in worms, in chronic diarrhea and dysentery. Its tonic and astringent combination renders it very useful. Turning to the Irish tradition, John Kehoe says, a decoction of the leaves, bark, and seed, and flour in wine, taken internally stops vomiting, the spitting of blood, excessive menstrual flow, and all other flows of the blood. So I'm thinking this is more the white willow. The ashes of the bark mixed with vinegar cause warts to fall off and soothe hard skin. The sap that flows from the bark is very good for inflammations of the eye. Let me see, this is what I call empirical evidence. When you find ancient Greece, England, and Ireland all finding out that the sap is good for inflammations of the eye, we have to believe it's good for inflammations of the eye, because these people were not really communicating with each other. Now, Brother Aloysius in the German tradition also wrote of white willow. He says, before the flowering period in April, the bark of 2 or 3-year-old branches should be gathered and left to dry. The decoction is a very bitter astringent and can fruitfully be used for the treatment of fever. It is indeed one of the best febrifuge remedies, especially for intermittent fever. It is also highly recommended for blood spitting and is a very potent tonic, meaning good for the stomach, good for digestion. Boil 3 to 4 tablespoons in 2 cups water until reduced by half. Add a little sugar or honey, as it has a rather bitter taste, that's to say the least. Anything with salicin is bitter. Take 1 tablespoon every 2 hours, or 1 tablespoon every hour in case of fever. It is a most efficacious remedy for heavy bleeding, also for chronic diarrhea, leukorrhea, excessive mucus, stomach cramps, nervous complaints, spleen and liver disorder, and foul or mucus stomach. He also describes making a powder of the dried bark of willow, and that could be taken, usually added to a little bit of wine, and taken for the same reasons. Father Kunzel, the great Swiss priest who was a wonderful herbalist, says, old people whose legs are weak because of old age or because of illness could strengthen their legs in frequent foot baths in boiled willow bark. The basket weavers sell the bark cheaply. And of course, yes, you do try to strip the bark off before you make baskets, so that makes a lot of sense. You may remember that Jolanta Wittib, an Austrian herbalist, and I wrote a commentary on her translation of Father Kunzel's work. She said in her notes, willow bark together with meadowsweet is part of Bayer aspirin. The original Bayer aspirin was actually an herbal product. It's since been synthesized. But willow bark and meadowsweet. I didn't mention meadowsweet. I mentioned masterwort. But yeah, meadowsweet was the original herb that was used along with willow bark. Is part of Bayer aspirin, and I am always careful to have enough willow bark and meadowsweet at home. I use only my homemade aspirin. In spring, just before the buds start opening, I cut a few 2 or 3-year-old twigs from a willow. The twigs are thinner than the thickness of a finger. I peel the bark and cut them into 1 centimeter pieces and dry them well and store them in a tightly closed jar in a dark place. Whenever I have fever, flu, pains in joints or muscles or headache, I make a decoction. Soak 1 spoon of the powdered willow bark in 1 liter of cold water for a half an hour. Then heat it on a very low heat for 20 to 30 minutes. I do not bring it to a boil. I add a spoonful of dried meadowsweet, and I might add some lemon verbena or lemon balm or lavender for a better taste and for better sleep. I let the infusion soak for 10 minutes, strain it, pour into a thermos, and drink half a cup every 3 or 4 hours. I know I have to wait for the soothing effect of the remedy, as it has to pass through the chemical factory of my body before the healing substances of the plant start to work, but then the healing powers start working very quickly. She says a quicker version is made by making an infusion. Pour 500 milliliters of very hot but not boiling water onto 1 teaspoon of powdered willow bark and 1 teaspoon of powdered meadowsweet. Leave 15 minutes to draw and drink many times a day. She says, this is my way of getting rid of infections with fever without ruining my stomach. And as you know, aspirin can be very tough on the stomach. Resources of the southern fields and forest states. The willow tribe, Salicaceae, all willows, or osiers. Bark generally astringent, tonic, and stomachic. And apparently the black willow was also called the swamp willow. That's Salix nigra, and was very much used. He was based in Charleston, so it was very much used in South Carolina. And he said it was the best substitute for Peruvian bark, or Cinchona quinine. He also used S. alba. Let's see, the species also considered valuable, but the bark has some power as a purgative and a vermifuge. So It also furnishes principle called salicin. From the results of late experience is found be less effective for fevers than quinine. We're just going to go with that. But it's a very good bitter tonic. So I think we have discussed that enough. He also used, he used many varieties of Salix. King's American Dispensatory of 1898. Action, medicinal uses, and dosage. Willow bark is tonic, antiperiodic, means it helps with excessive menstrual bleeding, and astringent bitter. It has been given in intermittents, against that's intermittent fevers such as malarial fevers, dyspepsia connected with debility of digestive organs, passive hemorrhages, chronic mucus discharge, and convalescence from acute diseases, and in worms. And occasionally is substituted for the cinchona bark, quinine again. It is inferior in activity. In chronic diarrhea and dysentery, the tonic and astringent combination of willow renders it very eligible. It may be given in substance in doses of 1 drachm of the powder, repeated as indicated, and the decoction of 1 to 2 fluid ounces 4 to 5 times a day. Just refer to what Jolanta said to get those measurements. These are, we don't really use these measurements anymore. The decoction has also proved efficient as a local application to foul and indolent ulcers or sores. So let's get up to modern use. Plants for future says of black willow, Salix nigra. The bark is anodyne, anti-inflammatory, antiperiodic, antiseptic, astringent, diuretic, febrifuge, hypnotic, sedative, and tonic. Whew, that's a mouthful. What do we not know there? We already discussed the periodic, antiseptic. Diaphoretic means fever. Diuretic removes excess fluid. So does febrifuge, also fever. Hypnotic. No, that's an odd one. It just means it can help you get to sleep. And, of course, that goes along with sedative and such. It has been used in the treatment of gonorrhea, ovarian pains, and nocturnal emissions. The bark of this species is used interchangeably with Salix alba. It is taken internally in the treatment of rheumatism, arthritis, gout, inflammatory stages of autoimmune diseases, diarrhea, dysentery, feverish illnesses, neuralgia, and backache, and headache. The bark can be used as a poultice on cuts, wounds, sprains, bruises, swellings, etc. Bark is removed during summer and dried for later use. The leaves are used internally in the treatment of mild feverish illnesses and colic. The leaves can be harvested throughout the growing season and are used fresh or dried. The bark contains salicin, which probably decomposes into salicylic acid, closely related to aspirin in the human body, and is used as an anodyne in febrifuge and as an ingredient of spring tonics. Rodale's Illustrated Encyclopedia of Herbs states willow bark is used by herbalists as anodyne, antipyretic, astringent, detergent. It actually means cleansing. What it said about indolent ulcers, I mean sort of like infected wounds. It can be used to kind of help prevent infection or clean them out. Tonic, antiperiodic, and antiseptic is used for headache and neuralgia, hay fever, pain, and inflammation of the joints, used just like aspirin. In Wiener's Herbal, herbalist Michael Wiener recommended a decoction of 1 teaspoon of white willow bark boiled slowly in 1.5 pints of water for 30 minutes. Drunk by a mouthful or tablespoon at a time as needed to promote sweating and chills and fever. Peterson's Field Guide for Eastern and Central Medicinal Plants states white willow, the bark of this willow and other willows, are very bitter, and astringent bark has been used traditionally for diarrhea, fevers, arthritis, pains, rheumatism, poultice or wash for corns, cuts, cankers, ulcers, poison ivy rashes. Salicylic acid derived from salicin found in the bark is a precursor to the most widely used semi-synthetic drug, acetylsalicylic acid or aspirin, which reduces pain, inflammation, and fever. Aspirin reduces the risk of heart disease and experimentally delays cataract formation. Wow. So, you know how it was used as an eye wash going back like 2,000-3,000 years ago? There you have it. Botany in a Day states willow is a commonly known wilderness medicine due to its aspirin-like qualities. It is used for headaches, fevers, hay fevers, neuralgia, and inflammation of the joints. Some of the salicylic acid is excreted in urine, making it useful as an analgesic to the urethra and bladder. And I think finally, yes, we will wrap this one up with what your doctor would use if you told him that you were taking an herb. He would pull out the physician's desk reference for herbal medicine. It is about a 900-page book that weighs a good 8 or 9 pounds, and it's not a fun read, but is an excellent reference. Physician's desk reference says, the efficacy of the drug is due mainly to the proportion of salicin present. After splitting of the acyl, is it acetyl or acyl? I can't remember. Residue, the salicin glycosides convert to salicin, the precursor of salicylic acid. Salicylic acid is antipyretic, antiphlogistic, and analgesic. White willow bark is the phototherapeutic precursor to salicylic acid aspirin. The salicin component is responsible for the anti-inflammatory and antipyretic effects of the tannin. The salicin component is responsible for the anti-inflammatory and antipyretic effects of the tannin content, has a astringent property on the mucous membranes. Under indications and uses approved by the Commission for Rheumatism and Pain, salicin is useful in diseases accompanied by fever, rheumatic ailments, headache, and pain caused by inflammation. Under unproven uses, his folk medicine uses include toothache, gout, gastrointestinal disorder, diarrhea, and wound healing. Contraindications. Willow bark is contraindicated in patients that have hypersensitivity to salicylate. Salicylate should not be used in children with flu-like symptoms due to the association of salicylates with Rye syndrome. Patients with active gastric or duodenal, ulcers, hemophilia, asthma, diabetes should avoid willow bark preparations. Salicylates should be avoided during pregnancy. Salicylates have been associated with rashes and in breastfed infants. Use is not recommended. Generally, no health hazards are known in conjunction with the proper administration of designated therapeutic dosages. Stomach complaints could occur as a side effect to the tannin content. So, what does all that mean? It means willow bark is basically just like aspirin. If you have an ulcer, don't use it. If you're on blood thinners, you probably not ought to use it. Can be dangerous with small children or breastfeeding babies. Generally speaking, though, it's as safe as aspirin and probably a little better for your stomach. And you get into like red osier dogwood and such, and you can really find some interesting aspects of this plant. Also really good in baths and washes for aching joints and sore muscles, and for weaving baskets. And again, if you get into basket weaving, that bright red osier, wow, that's just gorgeous. You can mix that in with just the sort of the white fronds of your basket weaving type of willows. Some of them have stronger, like weeping willow, longer fronds. Some are more jointed, like the black willow. There's a black willow just down the street from here. Totally unsuitable for making baskets. There's a weeping willow maybe a quarter mile away, about 3 or 4 of them. Perfect, But a lot of varieties of plants. Remember poplar buds and birch, very similar. Masterwort and meadowsweet, and probably several other plants. Really important to know. I would put willow like in the top 5-10 most useful herbs, and some of the first ones that you want to get to know. So useful for so many things. You think about basket weaving. You thought, well, why would I need to weave a basket? Well, for our ancestors, that's how they carried things and stored things. Not only that, but they made fish traps out of them and such. Our ancestors knew more about willow probably at 5 years old than most of us know at 50. It was just something they used all the time. And for medicinal herbs, yeah, it's pretty hard to beat. So, Dr. Quinn, medicine woman aside, anyway, y'all, have a Have a great week, and I will talk to you next time. The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.